I want to have a show and I want this show to go on. And 2 years from now, I want to be looking back and my show's grown from, 200 downloads a month to 2,000. And then one day I want to get sponsored. Like if you want to have that whole thing, like it's almost like becoming like a little business, you got to be prepared to do this thing week in, week out for a very long time.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another Bulletproof for BJ podcast. We are the Yin Yang Twins. Yo, this is not planned. I am wearing a white Parry Athletic shirt. Look, this is the West Coast Trials shirt. We just got it fresh. Thank you, George. Shout out Parry. Joe is also wearing a white Parry shirt with the Butcher Shop logo. This was not planned. It just goes like that sometimes.
Just we're both wearing Vivo barefoot shoes.
Jesus, we're both wearing like dark pants.
Yeah, some Lululemon, like tracky kind of athleisure pants.
Dang.
Hats. I haven't worn a hat for a long time.
No, but it's just one of those things. You're keeping the noggin a bit warmer in the cooler winter weather.
Yeah, my hair's getting a bit unruly.
Just rein it in.
You, on the other hand, just had a haircut.
I did. I went to the wrong barber, man. I went to my normal barber shop. The normal two dudes who cut hair, they're away. So I got some replacement guys in. The guy kept saying to me, I make look sexy for you. I make look sexy for you. Trust.
Oh, wow.
And I was like,
I don't need to hear that.
I don't need to look sexy, man. I got a fiance. Yeah. I'm not trying to appeal to anyone.
Just cut the hair.
I know what she likes. I know what I like. Don't f with it. No, trust me, zero. We put zero on side. Sexy. Let me line up for you. No, dude, don't line me up. I'm Wolverine. It'll grow back in one day and look shit.
Yes.
Don't do that.
Lining up only works if you get your hair cut every 2 days.
Yeah, he's like, no, let me. I said, I know you're holding a razor blade right now. I'll punch you in the throat, dude. Like, don't line me up. And he was like, oh, sad. Oh, yeah. he got disappointed. But then anyway, I did get a haircut, but I paid too much for not what I wanted.
Let me tell you about time I went to a barber shop in Salvador, Brazil.
Oh, no.
Salvador Bahia.
Please.
And it was just one of those days where I'm like, oh, this feels really gnarly. I was just walking around the town, you know, and people had been like, be careful in Salvador, you know, just be careful. Everyone says be careful everywhere in Brazil, and it's kind of true. But I was like, this part of town feels nice. And I saw this little barber shop, and there was a bunch of people kids hanging out in there, cutting hair and shit. And I'm like, I'm just going to duck into this barber shop.
Cool.
Yeah. And then I'm sitting there and I'm like, yeah, let's get a haircut. And then, it's like broken Portuguese. And the dude's like, what do you want? And then I noticed they got the cutthroat, like the blade sitting on the thing. But I'm like, that's an old blade they've got in there. Yeah. And then I'm just cycling through like, I'm going to catch a blood disease in this barber shop in Brazil. I'm not ready for this. Yeah. And then the dude came and he totally changed the blade.
Oh, thank God.
And I was like, my guy. Of course you were.
Yeah. I trusted you this whole time.
5 stars on Google. Let's go.
Oh, caralho, man. Man, so I've had this a couple of times, and you probably had it a little bit, which is how to build a podcast. So we are going to get more into just what you need. You're going to build a podcast. What do you need? Technical aspects, audio, video, everything you need to start. Now, we have an unfair advantage because we got my guy right here who's done podcasting before. We already had a technical setup of sorts, but there's aspects which you're not aware of, which we're going to tell you today, which you need to consider. It doesn't mean you got to go crazy. You don't have to do everything we do, but if you're not aware of these things, then it might put you off to a rough start. So I wanted to get into that, and I wanted to start off, first of all, with hosting, because it's the first thing you need if you're going to do the audio. Before we go to equipment, you need a hosting platform. So I'm going to throw to Joe because when you started, Joe, talk to me about when you started JB's podcast and you were like sussing that stuff out.
I mean, I can't, Paulie took care of it back then, but yeah, the hosting's like, you want to have a podcast, it has to live somewhere on the internet. So your hosting is just like a platform that says we will let it live here on our platform. And then from that platform, it's distributed out to various channels, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. So, your website has hosting, etc. So, we just went with something simple. There's a bunch of different options, but basically you're just signing up for a subscription there. And it's like, cool, here's how many episodes, or here's how much, how many hours a month you can upload before you move to the next plan. And it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Now, if you have a website, which we have for the gym, then we had it connected with our website.
Nice.
But say for Bulletproof, we never did that. You've always just publish the podcast through the hosting, right?
And then we kind of connected them separately, like took the RSS feed and then had that kind of implanted into the back end of the website. So then the episodes from the podcast live there too. But this is what I wanted to say, because the hosting is important. Because when I said to Joe, man, what's going on with hosting? He's like, well, we host with these guys, but do your own research. And I was like,
DYOR, bitch.
just give me give me the answers. Don't give me the work. He's like, nah, man, you said you wanted to do this. You need to put some work in. And I'm glad I did, because it made me go, there's all these other elements you want to consider with hosting, because it's not just cost. Because certain hosting platforms do heaps of cool shit for you. Like once you sync up to Apple, for example, like you have to apply for Apple to accept you as a podcast. They own a bunch of like umbrella, like they are the umbrella to a bunch of other podcasting networks.
Yeah, like syndicates.
And so once they accept and they validate you and say, yeah, your podcast lives on Apple Podcasts now, it will then appear on all those other ones.
Yeah.
Which is awesome. And if you have a really good host, like we're with Buzzsprout, because I checked out a bunch of other stuff. This is not a paid ad. This is just facts. Buzzsprout was rated number 1, far and above everything else, because they do so much for you. Like you can,
brother.
They'll do transcripts, they'll do a bunch of stuff.
Number 1, brother.
Number 1. And they do a bunch of other stuff now too. So if you're not someone who has a relative who is a sound tech who can edit your podcast, they can connect you with editing platforms and a lot of stuff, which you need to consider when you're trying to put out a podcast. Yep. Because the difference is now everyone has a podcast.
Yeah.
And I mean, even this podcast is very junior compared to people who started 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And, 15 years ago, who now dominate the platforms.
Yeah.
And so as a result, if you want people to listen to you, which is why else would you record a podcast, you have to consider a few elements. So let's talk about getting set up. First things first is audio equipment. So a lot of people, don't get me wrong, I'm one of those people. I did later Google search, what's Rogan's setup? Now, every podcaster is different, but Rogan's setup is not super crazy, actually. It's pretty reasonable. His mics and headphones are expensive, but let's talk about...
Do you need the best inside information on Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? I have the answer for you. It is Tap, Nap, and Snap, the Jiu-Jitsu newsletter. We have partnered with them to help you guys connect to the latest happenings, drama, gossips, and goings-on in the BJJ world. We even have our own little section dedicated to helping you move better for BJJ. So if you're interested to find out more, click the link below and get connected with Tap, Nap, and Snap, the BJJ newsletter.
I'm lucky that Joe already had the Rodecaster Pro, which is pretty awesome, right? Like,
thing's great,
dude.
It's a sound desk for podcasters,
but it seems very user friendly.
Yeah, it's like an iPod of sound desks,
because it doesn't got because I saw there was a sound desk in there.
Yeah, that was our original one,
which had like you look
bro,
like you got to be
it's like a cockpit.
A pit that you put your cock.
Yeah,
no, but it's like flying a plane.
Yeah, it's just heaps of dials and shit. And that thing always gave us, and there's like cables everywhere. This thing's like, you plug it in, you plug in your earphones, you plug in your mics, press record, boom, good to go.
It's got little modes to be able to transfer the files out to your laptop.
Yeah, you can Bluetooth to it, like so we can connect our phone up to it. Yeah, so like Rode is by far, in my opinion, the best sound equipment provider. They're an Australian company actually, but they're international in terms of they got the best like wireless mics for smartphones and all that shit. Rodecaster Pro is like, I don't know, it's like less than $1,000, I think.
Yeah,
and
or
it even
1,500-ish, depending on which one you get.
It even has like filtering in it, so the file that it spits out is like a little bit edited already to sound better. Yeah,
and I mean, so I was pretty lucky walking in on this because Joe's like, "This is what I do, man. This is how we set it up." Bang. More recently, we updated the arms right here. These are the is it Caterpillar frame, Gorilla frame, Gator frame. These ones are expensive as hell, but for what they are, but they're a beautiful thing because the cable lives inside them and you can adjust them in a few ways and
nice and clean.
They won't go droopy dick on you, won't get flaccid, which is an annoying thing. And these mics, these are Rode mics?
Yeah, these are the original Rode mics we have. The elastic on these holders is dying, needs replacing. But I mean, yeah, these are solid. So we started with these mics, Rode mics, some Rode arms, the desk, 2 pairs of Sennheiser earphones. Or no, 4 pairs, sorry, because we had 4 for everything. Mm-hmm. You basically have 4 cables. Cables go from your mic to your desk. And that's everything you need to get started.
Yep.
Now, there's other options, right? Like, we've seen people podcast with all sorts of different setups. You totally can. And I would suggest, like, you wouldn't need to go that hard in the beginning. But if you're thinking of, like, if you're serious about it and you're looking at spending, say you want to do a cheap setup, you're probably still going to spend like $400.
Yeah.
So maybe you can just spend like, I don't know, an extra grand, $1,400, and have everything that's like solid.
Yeah.
Versus $400 got you through for the first few months, and now you got to upgrade anyway.
Yeah. And look, this would be my advice, that if you're not prepared to spend some money to set it up, you probably shouldn't even start. Like, don't get me wrong. I know that there are people out there working off their laptop, just using, like, if they're doing an interview format, they're just using their, like, you know, earbuds. And there's plenty of top podcasters who do that. But what they do post is they run a bunch of, like, editing software over it to bring it up and equalize it and master it so it sounds decent. If you don't put that layer of production in, it's going to sound shit. And I've even had people, you know, when we've maybe had 1 or 2 episodes where we had a pop or a click or a buzz, people go, unsubscribe, you guys.
Yeah.
You did 300.
You used to think you guys were cool.
You did 300 good episodes, but that one episode, go burn in hell. Okay, cool. Good to know. Love you and leave you. So here's the deal. It's important to understand, if you're going to go to this effort, distribution is important, therefore video is important. Podcasts did used to just be audio. There was a time when people just did audio. But the person who really mastered distribution via YouTube was Joe Rogan. He was the guy, because before that, people could have a podcast that only people listened to on, you know, streaming platforms or distribution platforms, which were purely audio. But JRE clips became a much bigger thing because he had more and more colorful personalities and you wanted to see it. Then it became a phenomena that people were listening to podcasts through YouTube. They'd put YouTube up, but they would just be listening to it in the background while they're doing other shit, or they had it on their TV. We have 2 cameras that we use. So what are these? Talk to me about these cameras, Joe, being the master of cameras.
These are run-of-the-mill. These are both Lumix. These are like a digital SLR. They're like a 3/4 frame, so they're not a full frame, which is just like a smaller, cheaper camera. I think they're a G95. So they're like $900 each.
A grandish.
A grandish. Yeah, you know, which is whatever, like, no, you know, like
For cameras.
It's a reasonable expense. But in the scheme of cameras, they're like on the cheaper side.
But the quality's good.
Yeah, like really good quality. They got all the features you want. And really for us, they sit on a tripod and we hit record and they just need to be like full resolution. Like that's it.
Yeah, happy
That's
days.
the main shit. The thing with the cameras, and this is what we had to say when Jules was with us,
Yep.
was that the lenses really changed things. So Jules would use his lenses.
He has great lenses.
And the image just looks so much nicer. And
does pop.
that would be my dream for these one day, would be to have a more expensive lens. And it's like we're splitting hairs on that, right? Like if you're kicking off, it doesn't matter. But yeah, at a point, like having a really nice lens does improve the image quality substantially.
So why do you need cameras? Because people are like, yo, I'm doing a podcast, right?
Well, I don't think you have to do video, but I do think that if you want to do video, then you want to have decent cameras.
I'll push back on that because so many people have podcasts, people don't all subscribe to Spotify. And also people don't all listen to podcasts on, iTunes, but everyone uses YouTube. Like the YouTube use is, everyone uses it, right?
Yeah.
So for many people, because there's some countries even where they don't have Spotify, right? Spotify is not in every country in the world. So, but they have YouTube. So if you can point to your podcast as a contact point through YouTube, it doesn't have to be really well produced. It's just a way for someone to reach what you're doing. Same thing with Instagram. Now, generally, I would say just choose one channel. We have multiple channels because before we started the podcast, we already had Instagram, then we'd started YouTube, and then the podcast came.
Yeah.
So we already had those going. And it's a lot of work. Like, let's be absolutely honest. That's why Joe when I said to him, bro, let's have a podcast. He's like, bro, what? He's like, do you know how much work a podcast is? Like he straight away, he's like, man.
I mean, it wasn't quite that tone. It was more like, sure, bro, we can do
No,
it.
no, he
but
didn't
it's a
say
lot
we
of
could.
work.
He said, you can do it.
Yeah. Not as in like, that's a bad idea, but just like, yeah, but I know you're coming in with the rose-colored glasses.
That's me always.
Bro, we'll have a show. It's going to be so sick.
So cool.
Yep. Which it is, but yeah, it's a lot of work. Look, I think video is great, but I don't think you have to have it. I think it's depends on what you're trying to get out of your podcast.
You want listeners. You can't get listeners if no one knows you have a podcast. So
but there's heaps of successful podcasts that are audio only.
No.
Yeah, there's heaps.
From what era? Not the modern era.
Heaps. I mean, you got to have a show that has appeal. But
no, but I my pushback on that is those podcasts started before this current era of. Well, we're not talking about starting today. There's almost no podcast that starts now that's pure audio. Those ones that
wait, I don't. How do you know that? I listen to every audio and video podcast there is.
No, I'm saying if you look at a guy like Tim Ferriss, right, who has the OG podcast, he was the podcaster who inspired a generation, comfortably said. He admits the biggest weakness of his podcast is that he did not fully explore the video representation of it. It was audio only for a period of time.
Right.
This guy started 15 years ago. Or maybe it was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. Now we look at a guy like Chris Williams. He just went super hard, had this big cinematic screen, and it was a bit of a flex, but he got Tim Ferriss on. It was like, be a part of my TV version of this podcast. And I think Tim was like, I don't want to do all this. Because I heard him in interviews say, man, I just went on Chris Williams' podcast. That was next level. That was the news. That was 20 staff, rolling cameras. Like, he was like, I don't do that. Like, he's already rich enough and established enough that he doesn't have to do that.
Right, yeah.
Understand that a podcast is no longer just audio. Instagram isn't enough. YouTube isn't enough. Like, don't get me wrong. You need to start somewhere. But why do I say this? How do people know you have a podcast? How do they know?
Because people love recommending podcasts that they listen to.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, how do people find it? Because one of the hardest things about audio only is being able to share it with people.
Yeah, but so sure, the distribution is a thing, but there's, you might have an email database. You might be an email marketer.
Do you even have an email you use, my friends? Because here's the next thing.
Yeah, but you might have other means of communicating with folks. I'm just saying you don't have to have video, especially to get started.
I'm going to say you need at least one channel. But hey, take that as you will. That's why I'm recommending a camera, and lighting is part of that, right? We had also even identified in our content that because I sit facing a window without a blind, and there's a blind here, the lighting on Joey wasn't great. So we now have some light on him.
It's still shit. We want a studio ideally, but we just can't justify
We're working on it right now. It will happen, my friends. But this is what I want to talk about.
If you guys like and subscribe and give us a 5-star review, it'll happen. Do it.
Yeah, we'll
do it now.
But distribution is something, right? So you do have to consider that. Do you have a website? Like, do you have an email list? Like, what is it that you have that enables you to engage with your audience? Because ultimately, even though no one tells you this, it's not just your beautiful voice coming down the line. You're building a group of people who like to listen to you talk about whatever you want to talk about. So how do you look after those people? How do you nurture that audience? That's what you're doing. When you do an Instagram account for a business, you're trying to grow a community, an audience that engages with your business. Same thing with a YouTube channel. They're people who like what you do, and that becomes an audience, a group of people, a community that you attend. You need a way to be able to communicate and maintain this relationship that you're starting to build through the podcast. So Joe did touch on it before. He said, you could have a weekly email or a monthly email or something like that. I would say the least thing you need is at least a landing page to be able to point people to so that they could register their email or, oh yeah, this is what that's about. More information. Because someone I might say, hey Joe, you should check out this podcast. And you're like, all right, let me have a look. Have a listen. You're like, that's okay. Let me search this. Search on Google. There's no other information out there. You're like, oh, what is this? Do you know what I mean? Like in terms of being able to understand what it is. You don't Google things?
No, I don't listen to a podcast and then go, oh, what's their online presence like? Let me check them on Google.
No?
No, and it's the same as how most of our listeners that listen to us on YouTube, they don't listen to us on Spotify. Like people will do one or the other.
Generally, yes.
Absolutely. The podcasts that I listen to, I know nothing about them outside. Occasionally I might tag one on Instagram.
Interest, or that you listen to someone being interviewed and you're like, oh,
sure,
that person
but that's related to that person. That's not related to the show.
But before the shows you like Behind the Bastards, say.
Yeah, I got no idea what their online presence is like.
No, but you don't know anything about them as people. Like you didn't like. Go,
Not that
are
I've
they
had-
on Instagram or are they on YouTube or you don't.
No.
Well, I'm going to say that is just ignorant on Joe's behalf. If you're listening to someone online and you value what they say, you're like, well, let me find out more about this person. Are they a sexual predator? Are they actually? Do they stand up?
Yeah, very nice, Mr. Due Diligence over here.
Yeah.
No, it's fair that you do that, but I don't think that that's what everyone's doing, and I don't think you have to have an online presence, especially in the beginning.
Well,
because remember, we're trying to make this thing accessible, and if you remember how it was very accessible for us because we had the gear, we started with
but we were already ahead. What I'm saying is, it's difficult because we're already ahead.
But you got to remember, things happened in a process. It wasn't like we kicked off with all of this.
No, but I'm saying
so for us to tell
most people have an Instagram account.
Yeah, but irrespective,
and most people have a Facebook
These
account.
things are nice to have, but I don't think you have to kick off with all this shit in place. This episode is brought to you by Parry Athletics, the exclusive apparel sponsor of the Bulletproof for BJJ podcast. We've been working with these guys for quite some time now. We absolutely love the company. We love their gear, both for training and also just looking slick off the mats. They got excellent no-gi wears, shorts, t-shirts, all that cool stuff. If you want to get yourself into some Parry clothes or you want to rock the Bulletproof for BJJ exclusive merch, you got to go through Parry, go to parryathletics.com and use the code Bulletproof20 to get 20% off your order. They ship internationally.
I am saying that you need to consider these things. It's like telling someone, you should just start a podcast with a laptop and just whatever. You could, but then maybe no one will listen because, like I'm saying, even us who has invested time, money, and energy to make this a professional endeavor.
I'm just still laughing
We're
on the
having
inside
people-
about you checking the podcast to see if they're a sexual predator or not.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm saying I do due diligence because I'm like, oh, this person sounds interesting, but what are they like? Like, are they legit? Because then I'll do the background. I'm like, they're not legit, man. That podcast. Delete. Because I believe your time is precious, right? And that's why we don't want to waste your time right now. We want to make you aware of these things. So, yeah, you might do the MVP. You might do the minimum viable product of a podcast. Like Joe's saying, you don't have a website. You don't have shit.
Because the other thing is when you go all in on
you don't have to go all in.
Sometimes it's nice to start lean because you get a chance to figure out if this is something you can sustain. And it's like, can I do it? Can I sit down every week? And we'll talk about the consistency part, but can I do all of that? And yeah, I can actually. I'm really into this. Okay, cool. Let's go next step up on the,
Well, what I wanted to say
offering.
is this. One of the people who had contacted me had said, I'm going to start this podcast. Really genuine, good idea. And I said, you don't post on social media much. Had you considered that you need to post on social media about the fact you have a podcast? Because then even your friends and family might not know you have a podcast, right? Like this person isn't a really extroverted person. They don't talk about themselves much. So I was like, it will be very hard for you. If your intention is to reach people, and that's the point of a podcast is for people to hear the ideas you're trying to communicate, you have to become a communicator, whether that be to video, audio, whatever it might be. You have to have a way to get it out there in the world. Just relying on word of mouth is a surefire way to go from 5 listeners to 10 listeners in a year. You won't sustain that. You'll give the fuck up because that's not going to feel very rewarding. Like there is the feedback loop of not only is what you're doing good, but am I being effective, right? And so that's what I was saying. The distribution thing is important. So you need to consider that you need something, not just the podcast, to help you get it out there in the world, whether it be a newsletter, a website, Instagram, whatever. Something for you to consider. Now, the next thing that I would say is it takes a while to build an audience. We had actually talked about this a little while ago when I said to Joe, man, when we get to 10,000 followers, bruh,
on Instagram.
We've made it.
Yeah.
We'll get that blue tick. We'll be certified famous. And then we'll be rich and then we can just retire. No, that's not true. And then not long after I think we crossed that threshold, Instagram made blue ticks.
We said this on the episode last week.
Oh, we did? Yeah.
Yeah. But no, nothing. Our life didn't change at 10,000.
Nothing changed. But that's the thing. Like
Followers take a long time.
It took
if
ages.
you in any form of content creation, right? Instagram, YouTube, podcast, you got to be prepared to do the thing for
years.
years, like at least 12 months before you've got anything that and I'm really picking that, but nothing's going to happen within like 3, 6, 9 months. It's you got to be committed to this thing, and then over time you're like, oh, it's starting to grow. It's never going to grow at the rate you want it to.
No.
I would say we were actually probably, I think our podcast at times has grown faster than we expected.
Yes.
And I'm like, man, that's incredible. So grateful for that. Wouldn't say that that's going to be typical for most people's experience.
No. And I think here's another thing that we need to talk about with audience growth. There is a format to podcasts, and you may not even think about it yourself, but there is literally, in the same way there's genres in cinema. So you have action or comedy or horror or whatever it might be. There is also genres for podcasts, and they are easier and harder depending on the type of person you are. It is difficult if you are just one person talking, because depending on what's going on, you will run out of things to say. You may have, like, if you do 100 episodes, you've probably run out of new things to say to your audience if you have a niche or you're talking about a topic. Now, if you have an interview-based podcast where it's not just you talking, you are actually getting guests on and it's your ability to ask questions, that's awesome, right? Because you get to connect people like your audience with these people and share ideas, and that's really nice. But now you have the issue, and actually James Smith pointed this out about Diary of a CEO, that you just run out of guests, and you've already interviewed all the smartest, best people in the world, and now your guests are contradicting themselves, and you're not actually
starting to scrape the barrel a bit.
Yeah, you're struggling a little.
So you're talking about like different formats.
Yeah, this is a format, right?
Yeah.
Like, so us two speaking, you may have seen this with comedy podcasts where you've got two different comedians and they just either make fun of each other or relate on something, and you're like, oh, this is I can relate to this dynamic.
Yeah.
The benefit of having two people in that way, and that's why I definitely recommend, if you're an individual trying to start a podcast, it's worth having a co-host, because there'll be some days where you're like, I don't know what the to talk about. Like, I know I need to keep this going, I don't know. And then Joey comes in and goes, right, I got these, I'm talking about this and we need to talk about this. Like, oh, wow. Oh, great. That keeps you going.
Yeah.
And it can go both ways, right?
Yeah, for sure. We do that a lot.
We do that a lot. That's the tennis match of like, I hit it to you, you hit it to me. And that is actually a really powerful dynamic. I had always thought interviewing was the number one dynamic. Like Tim Ferriss interviewing someone, or like I always thought, wow, that's so powerful. But then what we came to understand that, at least for the audience we built, people come to listen to us talk what we talk. The interview episodes never rate as high as, I don't know, me going off on a rant, or Joe bringing something big to the table, you know?
Yeah, or just something that we didn't think was going to be a particularly heavy-hitting episode.
No.
Yeah, that's true. I think like you can see, I think a partnership is always like a low bandwidth way to go about it. It works. It's like you can bounce off each other. It's like you can motivate each other. Like often I come in tired because I'm like, had a shit sleep. JT's like, nah, bro, I got this idea. It's like, all right, let's go. Whereas if it was just on me or just on you, you'd be like, oh, maybe I'll do it next week, you know, or whatever. The interview thing, you know, there's people that do an amazing job of that, right? Yep. Like Main Idea.
Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
Abe Maynard, he's doing that.
Shout out.
Yeah, lovely dude, you know, and he's got a great show that's growing, and but you got to be like, there's a different. The work for him is different. The work for him is I got to book guests and I got to be on, like, follow my schedule, and I got to be there, and we got to connect up online and stuff. That might work really well for you. Whereas for us, what works for us is we get together, have a coffee, talk about what we're going to talk about, and then we press record.
Get into it.
And it's just like there's work either way. It just depends on what work vibes with you, I think.
Yeah.
And
you know, like say sorry to cut you off.
No, you're good.
But say like the people who do the solo episodes.
Yes.
I think I recorded one solo on the Jungle Brothers podcast once. I think for those people, if you really like writing and like, you know, like you think the guy at like History on Fire and all that sort of stuff, Daniele Bolelli.
Yeah.
Dan Carlin, they obviously
Hardcore
really
history.
like hardcore history. They obviously really like writing.
That's one of the most, just to put it in context, hardcore history is like, I think the single most successful podcast, like solo podcast.
Right.
But there's so many solo podcasts that
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
go nowhere.
But yeah, so if you like, I love sitting and writing out a script, then it's like, well, Matt, that's your work. And then you just sit down and read your script.
Yeah.
Like, and that for me seems really painful. But for someone else who loves writing, that might be a really easy way to go about it.
Yeah.
I've had that situation a couple of times recently where I've come to training with some water, but I haven't had any electrolytes, and I've finished training and I've had to go to a convenience shop and buy myself some kind of sports drink, usually a Gatorade. Cost me like $7. It's small and it really doesn't contain that much of the good stuff that I'm looking for, which are the electrolytes. Sodi, on the other hand, is my partner when it comes to hydration, and I'd simply just run out of it. And it sucks because I got to go buy expensive stuff that doesn't do anywhere near as good a job. I'm super stoked that we've been restocked with the Sodi, and now I can be properly hydrated when I train jiu-jitsu. This has always been an underexplored aspect of my training, and I'm so stoked that we now have these guys in place to support us and also the listeners of the show. So if you want to be hydrated on the mats so that you can perform at your best and have the best mental clarity while training, get yourself some Sodi. Go to sodi.com.au. That's SODII.com.au. Get yourself some delicious hydration salts and use the code bulletproof15 for 15% off. Go to sodi.com.au, get yourself hydrated.
And it's a different thing to have a chat. Like, because there's also, both Joey and I have had experience like having chats with people as trainers. You got to keep the conversation going, you know, like even if somebody says something that kills the conversation, you're like, all right, we need to turn a corner here.
Shut up. I think you're a fucking idiot.
Okay, I love that.
So anyway, tell me more about the weekend.
Yeah, it's one of those things, you know, and I believe that like this is practice. We've gotten better at it over time, and that you two will get better over time. But it does help if you have someone else to work off, whether it's a guest or a co-host.
Yeah.
You also see it where you have 3 or 4 people in a podcast, which that can,
Not a fan.
It can get messy, you know, like
Too many voices.
Yeah, but also it's an even bigger. It's almost like hacky sack of conversation. Someone has to be able to keep it going to the next, to the next, to the next.
I only experienced that the other day listening to Flagrant.
Okay, yeah.
And it was cool, but for the first like 40 minutes or so, there's like all these voices judging it, and I'm like, I don't know. Is that someone else? I couldn't visualize who's talking.
They're optimized for YouTube.
Yeah, right.
It's set up like a TV show. You know, they got the couches.
Yeah.
Everyone sits in their place. Like it cuts. I think that's the thing. There are some podcasts which are made for YouTube.
Oh,
now,
yeah.
You know, and there are some which are just really tailored to audio because you're like, wow, the sound of that voice. It's
like a hardcore history or something.
Yeah, you're like, this is a listen in the car or go for a walk type thing. And just being nerdy on this thing, when you are thinking about the information you're presenting, you do want to think about the audience. This is something like you've got this itch you want to scratch. Oh, I want to start a podcast. There is guaranteed a percentage of people out there in the world who are similar to you, who like similar things to you, and they would possibly listen to your podcast. But find them. You know, like it will be hard to find them, and you've got to consider they might like other things other than just this one thing you want to talk about. So it is important, and I always consider this selfishly. There might be something I want to talk about just because I want to get it off my chest or rant about it or whatever. But then I also think, all right, what are the struggles or challenges our people are facing? How do we give something helpful?
Yeah.
You know, like there is an element of that the person has to derive value, whether it just be purely entertainment, informational, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, and we kind of have in our mind when we're planning out episodes, like this one here is like all about value for the person. This one here is about entertainment.
Yeah.
And that kind of gives us, you know, it's like, okay, cool. You know, we try to stay heavier on the value side of things because that is really why we're here, like
Sure.
primarily. But we've also found out that the entertainment thing can be fun every now and again to do a bit of a silly episode.
Yeah.
And people enjoy it, and it seems to be a nice balance.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, there's podcasts that just as a counter that people will do like a series that, and I've listened to these for various specialized things like how to fix your email marketing, and it's
Yeah.
like these guys started a podcast, did 2 seasons, and it's all about email marketing, and they've obviously gone in, recorded the whole thing, and then the show has ended, and that's it. But that lives on. You know, that was why they put it out there, and it's a reference, and in it they're probably selling something, and
It's a resource.
yeah, and so that's different to ours, where it's like this living thing that's always happening,
Yeah.
forever until the end of time. So you know, again, just looking at like at the beginning, it would be good to sit down and go, well, what do I want from this? How do I want my show to be?
Well, let's talk about sustainability, because I think this is where Joe's brings a balance to things, because I can always bring the energy, even if it's a rageful, hateful, just want to take everyone down type energy. I still find a way to bring it, right? And it doesn't mean that's necessarily the best thing, because that's not necessarily sustainable. And you know, we did talk about this the other week, where we was talking about like, oh, Joe, let's do 5 episodes a week. We should just do
one a day.
2 a day, bro. 2 a day.
Squat every day, just for a couple minutes.
I get so amped. I overcome with enthusiasm, but then I'm also not thinking about
18 months down the track.
I'm not thinking about, oh, Joe has a week off, or we go over somewhere where it's really hard to record podcasts.
Yeah.
We can't keep that up. And
JT goes off jet setting with his next billionaire mate. Where are we going to today, guys? Joey, not sure when I'm coming back.
just me on the jet, guys. No, I think this is one of the things that, sustainability, and this is something Joe's talked about too, because you talk about it with social media with coaches, right? They have to find like a cadence, which is something that you got to start, throw and catch one ball, right? Could you do 1 a week? Or would you do 1 a month? Or like, what is the thing? Remove the barriers to entry. Like, the things I'm saying are not to scare you off. We are saying this, we're having this chat because we want to encourage you to go out there and start your podcast and go for it. We just want you to have your eyes open and have a good crack. What is something you can fit into your life right now? Like, could you allocate half an hour once a week?
Yeah.
Just a thought.
And then the second question is, can you sustain that for the next 24 months?
Yeah.
Because in reality, I think if you're not, unless you're like, yeah, look, I want to do this series and it's going to take me 6 months and then that's it. But if you're like, I want to have a show and I want this show to go on, and 2 years from now, I want to be looking back and my show's grown from, 200 downloads a month to 2,000, and then one day I want to get sponsored. Like, if you want to have that whole thing, like, it's almost like becoming like a little business, you got to be prepared to do this thing week in, week out for a very long time. And so with any form of content creation, be it email marketing, shooting YouTube videos, Instagram content, podcast, you have to be able to sustain it for a long period of time. Doesn't mean you can't take breaks.
No.
You can take a week off, month off here, maybe not a month, but you can take periods off, but you got to be prepared to do this thing for the long haul. What we see, and I think we saw this during COVID, is that the stats show there was a huge spike in new podcasts.
Yep.
And then within a year of that, like, podcasting had
Attrition rate.
Yeah, just because all these people are like, it's going to be so great. I got this mad idea. I want to talk about it. And then you find out, I've gone back to work. Life's just as busy as it was again. I don't have time to sit down and record this shit.
Yeah.
So I think podcasting is a very attractive and easy thing to get into, like starting an Instagram account, like getting your business cards printed up.
Sure.
But the reality is you got to be prepared to stick it out.
Grind set, bro.
That's right, baby. I want you to 10x that.
I think the other thing on that, and this is a smart move, is the caching. So record a bunch, like record 4 or 5 before you go, right, I'm going to hit the publish button.
Yeah.
That's actually super valuable, because
You got a buffer.
It factors in a sick day. And then the other thing is because this is the thing that really made me go, I got to talk about this. The idea that, I'll put more effort in when it gets some legs or it gets some following. That's a little bit ass backwards. Like, that's not the right way to think about it. obviously you've got to do the best you can with what you have at the time. So you start with minimal amounts and, you get into it. You think, yeah, I'm going to do this for a while. I will invest money. I will invest time. But there's time around it that you need to spend time uploading it, getting the transcript. Like there's a bunch of time I spend at least one day a week, where I am collating, planning, and doing stuff behind the curtain to make sure that this podcast rolls out consistently. And I've had times where I've messed up. I've had times where I accidentally only published 2 episodes instead of 3. And that was a mistake. Because also, here's the thing about the audio platforms, they have become more sensitive. If you're not consistent, they also don't, put your podcast out there as much.
Yeah, there is an algorithm at play in those platforms too.
And consistency wins, whether it's YouTube, Instagram, anything. Your ability to do the thing, whether it's once a week, 3 times a week, whatever it is, just being able to hit it every single time, that also brings trust with the listener. They know, every Wednesday I can listen to this thing which I like.
Yeah, one of my a successful YouTuber that I know, Chase Mountains.
Yes.
He had a chat with him back in the day, and he was like, bro, just start with something you can sustain and stick to that schedule. And he was doing YouTube videos once a month.
Right.
He's like, once a month, but he's like, it's paying my rent now.
Nice.
At my house. He's like,
So
that's
good.
And then the next milestone is whatever. But yeah, that consistency, be it multiple times a week, once a month, is going to be the thing.
Yeah, for sure. And so if you have more specific questions about you setting up and running your podcast, and we didn't touch on it today, you can hit us up. You can let us know. The other thing you can do is, like, we have a voicemail as part of on our website. You can go to bulletproofforbjj.com, go to podcast tab, go down, there's a little red button, and you can leave us a voicemail, and you can ask us directly, or you can hit us up on social media, etc. Because we are here to help. That's the main aim of this whole thing. So whether it's about the podcast, BJJ, health, fitness, whatever it is, hit us up. We are here to help.
Boss.
Yo.